start by sharing a little bit about my background and my personal story, just to let you know kind of why I champion these two topics that we're covering today. So I started in the staffing industry in 1998, and I worked for the world's largest staffing company for a number of years, and then one of the top 10 commercial staffing companies in the nation for a number of years, and then a professional services recruiting firm before I ventured out and started Franklin Professional Associates. So after, just about the time that I had the impetus to start my business, I was 32 years old, and my time working in the corporate world for 12 years was fun. It was a wild ride. It was also really stressful, really long hours, times when I would be having strategy meetings in the middle of the night with production managers that were on the third shift, and some just really stressful things that impacted my personal health. So I found myself pretty sick, and so I was in the hospital this one particular morning. It was 6:30 in the morning, and I had had a major surgery the day before, so I'm still on a morphine drip, and my cell phone rang, and it was an employee, and this employee he's a lovable guy, but he was one of these employees where when he called and I saw it was him, I'd be like, oh, it's always a hassle. So I'm like looking at my phone and I want to answer it, and then I'm thinking, all right, I'm still under the influence of morphine, and my abdomen was open about 12 hours ago, so if this nurse walks in and sees me working, I'm gonna be dead. So I answered the phone, and by grace, I had this flash that, Melissa, you were ridiculous. And from that point on, I think that was the impasse in my life where I thought, I don't want to put anybody else through or see anyone else put themselves through what I'd put myself through and my family through. So then my question was, so how could I, as I'm venturing into my business, create a work environment where we can support people's well-being, encourage their well-being and quality of their individual life, while also driving our company growth. So that being said, I've worked with a lot of companies of all shapes and sizes through the years, through good times, through bad times, through weird times, and I really have a passion at this point for helping companies to understand the value and the impact of creating work environments that really work. So with that, I will get into the material that we're going to cover today, and let me grab the clicker so I can move it along. So first we're going to cover the workforce update, but I also, first I want to share our goals for today. Kind of there's three things that I'd like to leave you with. One being the trends that we're seeing in the employment market and issues that you need to be aware of, and also how to problem solve around those issues so you can capitalize on them. Secondly, I want to just spark your thinking about how you can make positive transitions in your work environment to affect better productivity and also support individual quality of life for your employees. And then finally, I really want to show you how you can use your whole organization and turn it into a recruiting powerhouse. So with that, we'll get started with employment trends and what they mean to us. We'll cover the key issues in the employment market, move on to maximizing our labor force, and then adapting to the future workplace before we get into the recruiting quality employees section. The unemployment rate we'll touch on really quickly here. How many of you are clear on how the unemployment rate is determined? Okay.
I'm pretty sure I am.
Okay, pretty clear on it? All right.
No.
Okay. So every month, 60,000 households throughout the United States, so you can correct me if I'm wrong on anything, by the way. 60,000 households are surveyed, and people are put into one of 6 buckets. For our purposes, we're really talking about 4 buckets. We call them lines, but I think buckets is a better visual for what we're trying to talk about. So there's one of these lines or buckets, it's called the U3 line, and that line is the people who respond in this way. The adults, by the way, in the last 4 weeks, have you searched for a job? That line is what we officially refer to as our unemployment rate. Okay. Now there's 3 other relevant buckets. One of those is people who would like to be working, but they can't find work. And they have, at this point, not looked for work in the last 4 weeks. The other bucket is people who are wanting to work, but for some reason they just can't. For example, they might be taking care of an aging parent, or they've had to make the choice to stay in the workforce and pay for childcare, or just stay home because the ROI isn't there. And then finally, there's employees who are working part-time, however they want to be working full-time.
Yep.
So we have a, yes, please.
That's based on surveys? Somebody sits down and calls people and asks them, or there's no
Yeah.
official forms or anything? It's just
It's a telephone conversation.
Okay.
Yeah. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because while this is great that we've got a low unemployment, there is a caveat though, where you can see in about 2015 we were earning about 4.5% unemployment. I'm going to show you something on the next slide. Okay, so 2015, this is our workforce participation. So we had we've had this decline going on for a while now. We had a dip in 2015 in workforce participation, and what that signals is that as the unemployment rate was continuing to decline, suddenly the workforce participation rate declines. That was people who were in the U3 bucket who are looking for work in the last 4 weeks, suddenly they moved into the other buckets. So they're still not participating. So while it looks great that our unemployment rate continued to decline, it's not necessarily because everybody was starting to go to work. So that's posing a bit of a problem because 2015, keep that year in mind. As we go to the next slide, right about 2015, we saw an eclipse of the number of new hires happening over the number of new job openings going above the number of new hires. So traditionally, the lines have trended together, new job openings, new hires. Now what we're getting is more and more and more job openings, and we're leveling off with new hires. So you can see how that's posing a problem for us. This slide is actually from April of last year. I didn't find the updated slide, but I can tell you that in October, the number of job openings had already been updated to 7.2 million over the 6.8 that was reported in April. So the gap is widening, and it's widening on a pretty good pace.
excuse me, this is off base, I know where you're going with that, but is the reason less people looking for work have anything to do with retiring?
You just answered the next question.
Sorry.
No, spoiler. No, that's great. Thank you, Steve. So yeah, the questions would obviously be, why is this happening? And yes, there's basically the number one reason is the aging workforce and people retiring. And as I'm starting to see more and more now, people who I don't think would ever retire are finally being forced into retirement because of disability. The other reasons are that more parents are deciding to stay home and not work. More graduate students are deciding to attend graduate school full-time and not work. And we have more people who are becoming discouraged because there's a skills issue where they're not able to get into the workforce. So we have a number of people kind of out on the sidelines for various reasons.
Well, I'm just curious, the last one you said more people are discouraged due to lack of skills. Mm-hmm. So are those jobs across the board? Are they more blue collar, white collar? Is there a difference between where there's more jobs available but there's less hiring going on in like a field?
It does kind of run across the spectrum,
Okay.
but I can tell you that, the higher skilled positions, it definitely is a case where, we don't see people getting locked out of the workforce. It tends to be, the majority is lower skilled, particularly as automation is coming in. For the last 30 years, as automation has, taken a bigger portion of these kinds of jobs, and it is continuing. I mean, now we're seeing chatbots and AI that's doing a lot of what knowledge workers used to do. Call center, customer service stuff, didn't see that going away, but some of it is starting to go away now, yeah.
How does that relate to them saying we need to open the borders because we need more low-skilled workers?
Maybe we could do another session
That's
on
a
that. We put this stuff aside.
It also, the skills part is getting more skills costs more money for people to learn, go to school or something, and if they don't have a job,
Yeah.
they're at a point where they can't get past that level.
You're leading thank you for both of you, because you're leading right into, I think, some points that are really important. The way that we approach training and reskilling, upskilling, reskilling and upskilling, are these terms that you're hearing or seeing in headlines right now?
I haven't heard the term, but one of the things, because we're in manufacturing, that we're involved with is touching base with some of the colleges and some of the tech places that they are organizing programs to get people into job skills that we can use.
Yeah, that's great. So we're seeing a lot more of that.
We had people come for an interview, and I'm finishing my training at night to be able to become, what you're looking for.
Okay, question for you. I'm curious. Have you been offering any kind of paid training or hiring people and then having them go through trainings?
It's hard for us because we're so small. It's not like we got a few hundred people in the factory and
Yeah.
people can cover for each other. So we need somebody, we need them right away. So we don't have that ability like my last company did.
Right.
But we do offer college tuition reimbursement, which the guy on the floor was doing that. So we do offer that and try to get them to learn more skills. But a lot of what we do is so unusual that you got to kind of learn from the other guys on the floor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, how you were leading right into the next kind of segment here, and the way that skilling and training is shifting in the world at this point. Traditionally, job applicants were expected to come to the table when they apply for a job with the qualifications. The burden of training is starting to shift away from employees and more onto employers, as we're seeing more employers offering paid training. Also, there's still certainly value in the traditional education, universities, and but we are seeing a lot more alternatives and kind of non-traditional. And even further than that, companies are starting to collaborate with employees on cultivating or curating trainings from open sources. TED Talks, podcasts, books, lynda.com, what is the name of it? I'm gonna forget it now, and it's like this big training company that's online, Coursera. So there's this mix now that organizations are using and taking feedback from employees to create trainings that really help them continue to develop. And it's this learning and developing that has to be looked at as continual. In fact, I don't think I have a slide on it, but there's a company called Haley Marketing, and they did a recent research study into the depth of the skills gap issue that we're dealing with. And would you believe that they found that the average person loses 33% of their skills every 4 years, effectively, because of the rate of change in our world right now. So for some people, it's about getting to the table because they're already behind the 8 ball. And then for others, it's it's about not getting into that situation. So we really all have to collaborate very diligently on this topic. So I'm so glad you brought that up, and the reason that I feel like it's important to be talking about these things is because from your organizational standpoint, it's getting harder to find people. So if you can understand the obstacles that they're dealing with, and you have an opportunity when you are presenting a position you need to hire for, to help the people in these categories overcome those obstacles, now you're casting a wider net, and you can open your company up to a pool of candidates that otherwise wouldn't be available to you if you weren't thinking about that.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
For our company too.
Really?
We're currently hiring for a customer service specialist, and a lot of the resumes we're getting in, we just posted it recently, are job hoppers, not there for a long period of time. That's a big one. Overqualified, so bringing them aboard, knowing that they're probably gonna look for the next thing. So, yeah.
I have a client, or years ago I had a client actually that I think was ahead of his time in his thinking, and the way he expressed it was, when you're looking at someone as a candidate, you really have to look right and left. And I loved how he had that very comprehensive understanding way back when. So you're smart.
Be a good fit too, you know.
You're smart to be doing that. Okay, so to that point of, how can we overcome obstacles? Well, remote, flexible working opportunities, going back to the example, if someone's caring for a loved one at home, they're housebound, probably, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they have no time in the day to contribute something. And again, the remote option can also really help a lot of people. In fact, when I started my business years ago, I didn't have much of any budget to be hiring in the early days. We were, bootstrapping. But I was able to find a virtual assistant who was landlocked in upstate New York. She didn't have a lot of employment options. She had great skills. So she was willing and able to work for about 50% of what it would have cost me to hire somebody here locally. And it helped her, it helped me. So, just thinking kind of creatively like that.
Have you seen an increase in remote? I worked remotely for 6.5 years for a tech company, and in the tech industry, that's very big because you can recruit people from anywhere in the world, really, to work for you because they can work from home, but they have the skills. Is there any increase in that?
Huge increase.
Really?
Absolutely. There are companies popping up, and they've been in place for about 10 years, maybe a little longer, but companies like Upwork, Freelancer, Elance, Brickwork India, and Brickwork India, actually, I believe this is still the case, they're all MBAs that will work on projects for you. And not to say we're trying to, get workers on the cheap, but it's definitely a lot cheaper than it is to hire a team of MBAs, if you need some serious, business strategy work done or something like that. I've actually also hired from Upwork and had some success with people doing creative work. That's a good venue for something like that. So yeah, that's absolutely.
There's also a big push on remote offices. So
Yeah.
buildings that you can rent a room for certain a couple hours.
Yep.
I know they're huge in Boston too.
WeWork.
New York.
There's another
one in
one.
Cambridge near Alewife.
Yes. I saw one in Marlborough the other day. It's called Venture X. It's under construction, and it's this, and that kind of goes into the generational stuff too, because it's very collaborative. It's fun. It's an experience, and there's lounge areas that you can just kind of pluck yourself down. So yeah, I love that. And then soft benefits. So soft benefits, kind of again addressing the obstacles people are dealing with. Maybe it's childcare on site, or pet care on site, or assistance with elder care, things of that nature. Okay, technology in the workplace. I'm assuming you've all seen one of those, correct? No? All right, well, that's probably encouraging.
That's what she does to me.
This is actually, I don't remember what they actually call it, but it's essentially a brain zapping headset. So I'll explain this one a little bit. This technology came out of the United States Air Force. It's probably no secret that the military has used a variety of methods. I don't know much about them, but they need the members of our military service to be alert, and sometimes be alert for extended periods of time. What they discovered by using this technology is they could extend that to about 6 hours. So believe it or not, when I read this article in Inc. magazine in November, and this company in Silicon Valley got a hold of this technology, which, by the way, it just stimulates the left frontal cortex, and that's the area that apparently controls attention span and such. So they've developed this headset, and it is, I had to do some research because I'm like, this might be just whatever. And no, I did find that it is something that's kind of emerging in the academic world at this point. And the forecast is, this is from Inc. magazine, so I'm sure it probably came from the founders of the company. But their intention is to see these in the workplace as commonly as coffee pots. So now I'll be honest with you about the reason I really told you that story. Because some of the things I'm going to present is kind of new, kind of maybe a little unconventional, maybe a little uncomfortable. So I figured if I start with brain zapping headsets, everything else is going to sound pretty good. All right, so let's move on to talk about maximizing our labor force and retention of successful teams. And I think I have a story that I want to tell you, but I just need to reference what that one might have been about. Oh, yeah, I did want to share. Technology in the workforce. I went by some emerging applications. Have you guys heard of the Da Vinci robot that's used for surgeries? So, no, okay. So this came out maybe 10 years ago or so. And so what this robot does is it allows a surgeon to perform surgery extremely precisely because it's actually the robot that's working on the patient, these arms and such. And they're just using a hand controller, kind of like a video game. Well, what this did was it allowed for a surgeon who's a specialist, who lives on the other side of the world, to perform a surgery on a patient by not even being in the facility. So it really opened up the world. I mean, when you think about somebody who has a very, very specialized skill, to be able to share that around the world is pretty impactful. We're starting to see this come to the workplaces in different applications. So for example, auto mechanics. Believe it or not, a fighter jet has 30 million lines of code in it. The average car going on the road today has 100 million lines of code in it. So these poor auto mechanics who are repairing vehicles are going through some really rigorous certifications, and it's really expensive. I have a friend who owns a dealership. It's really expensive to get the certifications and then to maintain. Once you have the certification, doesn't mean you can have access to the manual. Then you got to get the manual, which is a subscription, which you pay for every year. So you can see how this gets really expensive. So now what mechanics can do in a dealership when they're repairing a vehicle is wear this set of augmented reality glasses, we're calling them, and they're connected to a mechanic who has the certification somewhere, who knows where, and the mechanic can watch a screen and see what the mechanic who's actually physically working on the vehicle is seeing and what they're doing and tell them what to do. So that's kind of a way of remote collaboration, another way. And then I think the wildest one I've got so far is X-ray vision glasses that machine mechanics are starting to use so they can actually look into machines, see where things are breaking down. Now, we won't go into the HR nightmare of X-ray vision glasses in the workplace, but it's just, like I said, some ideas to stimulate your thinking about what the possibilities are kind of coming down the line. All right, so now we'll talk about retention. What I would say, how am I doing that time? Oh, good. So what I would say about retention is, when you think about retention, think about what is the purpose, or what are we trying to achieve with recruiting and retention? Will allow for someone to step into a seat when you unfortunately have to see someone go.
Right people at the right place at the right time.
Exactly. The other thing is, I remember years ago, about 15 years ago, I was working with this manufacturer, and it was just as the Gillette Venus razor had hit the market, and it was really, really popular. So they couldn't even push out production fast enough. They started implementing automation, and when they did that, it was a little bit of a disaster because the people they had in their production team didn't have the skills for this automation. Now we're talking about computer screens and touch screens. So they started losing people. When I was introduced to them, they were somewhere around 60 or 65% turnover. And they were kind of at the forefront of automation in the area at the time. So there weren't skilled people to step in either. So we were working on a strategy, and we ended up getting it to about 30%. And before someone else, I had moved on, so someone else stepped in to continue it. And I started thinking about, we were really excited about the impact and obviously getting the turnover into a much better state. But then I thought, okay, well, what is the end game? What are we really looking for? Are we wanting people to stay forever? And the answer is no. No, we're not. So when you think about retention and successful teams, I think you need to bear in mind that the markets change, your business direction, your objectives change, people's skill levels may be changing, or changing in the sense that they're not calibrated any longer. So there's a level of turnover that is appropriate, and retention. I guess what's a good retention, right? I think a good retention is someone in a position for the right amount of time on either side. So for example, I had an employee who came to me who was phenomenal, such a great producer, such a great performer. And she came and said, I love this recruiting thing. I've learned so much. I feel like I've got it. And now I think I want to be an HR generalist. So that's really hard when you've got a great producer who has this next step in order to be fulfilled. It's hard to say goodbye to somebody that's a really strong performer. But I think that it's necessary. And so that's just kind of something to consider when you're thinking about retention, and the importance, even more, the importance of having a farm team. So farm team, is that a term that, so farm team is people that you are ready to hire as soon as you need them. So you're building your network constantly.
And the key with the employee who's developing themselves is, comes to a point where if they don't move up, they're gonna get too comfortable, and then their performance is gonna lower because then you're like, there's no way for me to grow, and you lose interest.
My husband just switched. He was with the company almost 20 years, 1 month shy of 20 years, and he just made a huge switch.
Wow.
And he's an engineer. He's an aerospace engineer, and so he said there's just a point where I can't, he's not moving up, but it wasn't even that. It was just what Rocco said. He just got complacent. He's like, I'm not excited. He was put into a pigeonhole position, and he said that he had the same issues with the folks on his floor. Like, they got to a certain point and they were so skilled, and then they were like, well, what's next? Yeah. But their skill set didn't, move over. It was a skill set on the floor and a great manager on the floor, employee manager, but they didn't have the skills to move up to the next position. So there's that turnover that he saw all the time in manufacturing. Yeah. And then, you think about it on the grander scale. If we're gonna, in this challenging situation that we have, if we're gonna be able to contribute and to compete as a nation, and if you have someone who's sitting there for 3-4 years and they've got this impetus to grow and this ability to grow and skills that are going by the wayside, then, again, when I'm talking about maximizing the labor force, we can't be wasting good human capital like that. So I think, like you said, it's important to have right people in the right seats at the right time. So, okay. And then I think we kind of touched already on the remote working for maximum productivity and ROI, unless you want to hire this #1 ranked in the world surgeon to work at your hospital versus, using that person's skills if and when you ever need it for a patient, that kind of example.
From the other side, I used to work 2 miles, 1.5 miles from my house, and now I've got a 40-minute drive, and I'm an accountant, so I did the math, and it's costing me probably $5,000 a year just to commute.
Right.
And that was a consideration when I looked at the salary where I was and where I was going.
Yeah.
So being able to work from home is a $5,000 raise, actually a $7,000 or $8,000 pre-tax raise.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that, because I'm hearing of some companies now that they recognize the value of location for retention purposes. So they're actually paying a premium to you if you will agree to live closer to their facility. It's kind of opposite of what we used to do. We used to be like, well, they're going to be close to the office, so they don't need that much money to. Yeah, everything's going on its head. All right, so we covered remote working. Last thing I'm going to talk about here with maximizing our labor force, I just had to bring out the Netflix Culture Desk. Have you all seen the Netflix Culture Deck, before? Oh, so you can just jump on to Google and search this up. It's worth spending some time contemplating. Netflix, under the leadership of Patty McCord is her name. She was the right hand to Reed, I forgot his last name, but he was CEO of Netflix for years and years. Patty was with him for 14 years. And she was very instrumental in building the HR organization that was able to allow Netflix to do what they've done in the last 20 years, which isn't shabby. And one thing, when we think about work environment, under the high performance, I'm sorry, I don't know if you can see this, so I'll just point it out. They say great workplace is stunning colleagues. And then again, under promotions development, they're saying here, we develop people by giving them the opportunity to develop themselves by surrounding them with stunning colleagues. I love that term, stunning colleagues. If you want to have something that would attract people to come to work for your company, just let them know that they're going to work with stunning colleagues. I mean, who doesn't want to work around other people that are, I'm not talking about physical attributes, but literally just professionals that are, truly stunning. Netflix, by the way, they were, I think, the first to do away with performance evaluations. They were the first to do away with paid vacation. They called it the no vacation policy. So take what time you need. They tracked it. Mm-hmm. And then what they found was that on average, people took 2 extra days a year. So
I've heard, my wife they took it away, they said, take what you want.
Yeah.
But I've heard the big complaints about that is everybody's taking less. And actually, companies don't like that either because they're not coming back refreshed.
Wow.
That's a national type average thing is what I heard, but I don't know the source.
Google did that as well. Google has no policy whatsoever for personal time at all.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In their facilities, yeah.
My cousin works for a company, IT companies in Virginia. They took away their PTO completely.
They
Take
did?
as much time as you want,
Yeah.
but get the job done.
Yeah. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. If you hire adults who are engaged and want to,
Well, that comes back to my thing is, you can talk about skills all you want. Give me the right personality.
Yeah.
I can train the skills.
Yeah,
If
exactly.
you get the wrong personality, then
Yeah.
In customer
Won't
service,
last.
that's exactly what it is. I can train anybody to do the job. I can't train your personality.
But the other thing I've discovered is that, because I've worked for companies that are very lenient and let you get away with a lot and you still working, so you got a lot of dead wood that don't, they get away with a lot of stuff. You do things like this, you gotta be willing to cut loose a lot of people to end up with
Exactly.
what you want.
Yeah.
Right.
Like they're hiring only the stunning colleagues. I mean, they've got some rigorous recruiting practices going on to be able to make this work. But I really respect a lot of their attitudes. Just recognizing that people are human beings and not human doings. So I wanted to share that with you. And this is what I'm talking about. When I say a work environment that works, it's realizing that employees today they're not looking for just a job. They're looking to come to work for an experience. So that means, the lines between the way you experience personal life and the way you experience professional life are very much blurred. And I think mobile devices is an example of how that has emerged, right? I mean, you have a phone that rings at night. It could be a business call. Patty McCord came up with this idea when she was at Netflix, and I really think that it resonates. Just getting myself up to speed here. Okay, so it's very simple. There's 3 conditions to the algorithm for a successful hire, and that is someone is great, exceptional, I should say, at doing what they love to do, and your company needs someone to be great at that thing. So they're exceptional at what they do, they love doing it, and your company needs specifically someone great at that. I don't know if you've ever been in this situation where you feel like someone has a ton of great things to bring to the table. It doesn't exactly fit what you need, but maybe you could reformat the job a little bit, or make concessions and considerations. And I'm not knocking that, kind of helping to pull things together at times. But if you're thinking about a really rigorous recruiting machine, then that level of discipline using this algorithm, I think, is critical. So, engaging. Let's talk about engaging candidates. So I say, engaging candidates is like beer. Well, it's like selling beer, actually. I'll give you examples of what happens when he drinks these beers. Like Sasquatch takes pictures of him. He beats the bulls in the bull races. Yep. He flies planes and wins trophies, and these beautiful women come racing out on the beach to greet him and whatever. So I use this example because I love the way beer companies get this. They're not selling the beer. They're selling who this guy is when he drinks this beer. So you'll be like this guy, right? So it's the experience.
Or the Budweiser one that they have going around with the medieval times. I think it's Budweiser.
Mhm.
Yes, yeah.
I think the best one I've seen recently is the new Gillette ad about fathers and what kind of dad do you want to be. And it is absolutely a cultural, it has nothing to do with the rate, it has nothing to do with the product. It is 100%, teach your son to not fight, teach your son to be respectful. It's an amazing video that they've done. They've completely rebranded their buyer.
I heard about that. I haven't watched it yet. But
I'm happy to show you guys later, but it is a phenomenal commercial that has come out by them, and it's
they've
way to
gotten a
go,
lot
dads.
of backlash too from that.
They really should.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, it was well done. They did a really good job. But it speaks very much like this, because it's selling the person. They're selling the product to the person they want. Buy this razor,
Yeah.
you'll be this dad.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Jimmy
yes.
Buffett did it in spades. I mean,
Oh.
he's an extremely rich man off of one song because he sold the culture of escapism lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
So you escape when you go. His concerts still sell out to this day.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah.
And he's building his third or fourth condominium complex of hundreds of homes that sell for $250,000 up to $800,000 or whatever, and it's a Margaritaville community. And you can go buy homes there. So, I mean, this thing's enormous, And
Parrot heads are dedicated people.
I got tickets to the August concert. So, but it's because I had a lady there. It's like she was at a concert upset, and I was like, "You're at a Jimmy Buffett concert. You don't see fights at a Jimmy Buffett concert. Everybody's laid back. It's just cool."
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's kind of almost like the hippies, "Yeah, we love you, man." So this lady's all upset. So what's the matter? Well, he's a hypocrite. He doesn't even drink. I said, "The man's like 70 years old or 60, whatever." I said, "He doesn't. You can't drink every single day and run a business." Besides, I don't love the man. I love what he's selling.
Right, exactly.
But
It's the
that's what
culture.
people do. They buy
You're buying
in. They think he
culture.
needs to be
Yeah.
that way. It's like no.
Yes, absolutely.
Anyway, I thought he was a really good example because he's living it.
Yeah. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because we're talking about engaging candidates. First thing I'm going to kind of discuss here with you is the way that we advertise jobs. I see a lot of companies are still advertising their jobs with a job description. When you think about it, if a beer company tries to sell beer the way that companies are trying to sell their jobs, it would look a little bit more like that. Not compelling, right? Yeah. All right. So, is anybody doing employer branding or like employee testimonials, videos, things of that sort yet? Oh, yeah. I mean, we're ourselves kind of trying to get that up and running. So a lot of bigger companies, a lot of companies that have been early adopters and implementing this are really seeing the rewards of it. Just simple videos that go out on social media. I forget the number exactly. It's close to 70% of people now, when they're looking to go work at a company, they're checking them out online and they're looking at least 6 reviews, like Glassdoor.
Yeah.
They want to know, what is my experience going to be like? when I work with this company.
We
So
use social media a lot for staff anniversaries.
Oh,
as
good.
well as if we do events, we post pictures.
Oh, you're doing it?
Yeah.
Okay.
We we're going a little bit towards the video thing, but not much.
So people can go and find what it's like to work and get a sense of what the vibe is.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's great. That's what we need to be doing. Okay.
And the long-term employees, which is a big one, that they see that.
They need to be re-engaged, right?
Yeah.
That's what I found as well, is that long-term employees need to be re-engaged, and that's a great way to do it now. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Including them on social media, because
Yeah.
they're all on social media, and it's a way for them to be
And then when
re-engaged and reconnected with their company publicly, which is really nice.
Right, and when the job candidate looks at your site and they see someone's been there 18 years, they're like, wow, this
Uh-huh.
is where I want to work.
Yeah. I know, that says a lot in and of itself. So, I have another video, so I'm just gonna skip that. It's not something that's extremely compelling. And I'm just curious though, have you seen the ads that GE have put out? It's a campaign called What's Wrong with Owen?
Yes.
It's pretty cool how they've figured out how to brand and appeal to different generations and continue to get their message out. That it always ends with, so Owen is he's this poor kid who's like a computer engineer, and his dad's like this industrial, swinging a hammer, and he graduates, and his dad's like trying to give him his grandpa's hammer that's like 50 pounds, and then the kid's like, Dad, I don't need a hammer, I'm gonna be coding, I'm gonna change the world, and then the dad's like, you can't pick it up, can you? And but they always get their message, we're changing the world. They always get that in there. And then they really make it appealing to both generations in a really brilliant way. I shouldn't say both generations. We've got 5 in the workforce right now, but both ends of the generational spectrum. So I wanted to just talk about that for a second, because especially with the emerging workforce, this is what's so thrilling to me, is that they are really keen on the purpose-driven nature of an organization. So one of my questions when I go in to interview a client and figure out how we're going to help them gain a competitive edge in the employment market where they're struggling to recruit is, how are you guys changing the world? And most of the time they look at me like, we sell widgets, like we're not changing the world. And I'm like, well, no, yeah, you are in some way, shape, or form. You got to start thinking about that. So just wanted to share that. Okay, generational considerations. I'm sorry, there's a lot of text up here. I did want to just touch on a couple of the key lines here. When we're thinking about engaging candidates, I think the key abilities and the tagline is really interesting to look at for these various cohorts. I'll give you a second to just take a peek at that while I catch myself up on my notes here too. Can you see it?
Mm-hmm.
You can?
Yeah,
Okay.
perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's heard about people being tuned into the station WIIFM.
What's in it for me?
Yes. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're thinking about your messaging to people that you're trying to attract out in the marketplace, I'd like to be able to come back to something like this. And is anything surprising? No. Yeah.
No.
I disagree.
didn't know-
I disagree with the tagline because I'm a millennial, but that's just
Really?
It's all about me is not the right tag.
well, I guess just for like
Everybody's different, I agree.
everyone's different.
I totally
But
agree.
Yeah, that's really not a fair way to
No.
put
Well,
it.
Yeah.
it's interesting because I did not know, because I didn't realize that they had changed what the names were for the generations, and now I'm a Gen Xer,
Oh.
which I didn't realize I was a Gen Xer at the time, and I agree, I disagree. Help me balance, that would not be mine, but I definitely have 2 Gen Zers, and that would definitely be their tagline, is seeking varied experiences, 100%.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with Galen. That's,
I mean, I definitely just like talking to people in certain situations. They're like, well, why didn't I get this? And I get that but I don't think that's the majority. I don't know.
yeah. I think the
I think
millennials,
independent probably should be the millennials too.
you know what's interesting is, I feel like millennials have really been beat up a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
And unfairly. And I think part of it stems from the fact that, you know, you had this big baby boomer generation, and then you had this half the size X generation. So we weren't, I'm an Xer,
You are.
we weren't big
I want
enough
both.
to make any waves. So baby boomers, you had it like
Yeah.
your way for 2 straight generations. Now this big cohort comes in, you know, millennials, the big generation again, and all of a sudden it's like, what are they doing? Everything's changing, they're shaking it up, and it's like, well, you know, it's almost like a double whammy because we skipped a cycle, you know. So so sorry, I think that's kind of what's happening.
No, it's fine. And I think it ties into the key abilities of like the competitiveness too, always wanting to be like on top. So that,
Yeah.
I guess if you read it in like that sense, it could be like more of it's all about me, if that's what they mean.
And you know what else is like, you think about,
I think the millennials too, like that 80 to 83 kind of are like, some people say they're Xers, some say millennials, and
I'm late 79, so I've read some definitions where I'm technically millennial, and then others where, so it depends.
It all shifts.
They
It does.
split it all
They shift it when it's convenient to say this generation does this.
Yeah, yeah. Oh,
You
and
draw a line, it's a societal upbringing.
I've also, oh, here's a new one, so X-Zennial.
Yeah,
You heard that
my
one?
oldest daughter apparently falls into that one now.
Yeah, yeah, it's like the in between. So, but if you think about, I don't know if they have that here. No, they don't. If you think about the events that happened in the key years of maybe age 12 through 20 for these people within these different cohorts, those are the years where whatever's going on in the world is what was shaping your values and your norms. So, you know, when you think, Kaylin, about, you know, what you were growing up with from 12 to 20, and however it's been determined that we feel like this generation sees things as all about me, it's not necessarily a level of like selfishness, it's just what was going on that would create that kind of a mindset, right? So anyway, just a little anecdote. So I'm kind of continuing with engaging candidates, and really quickly, as you're doing that, so for example, let's take the Gen Zers, super tech savvy. One example of ways that I think PwC is doing this, PricewaterhouseCoopers recently came out with actually a couple things. They have a job application process now that is really cool. You've heard of gamification in the workplace? Okay.
rules and leaderboards and all that stuff.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, and you were working for ADP, they had like a level of gamification, right? So, Randy Zuckerberg, Mark Zuckerberg's older sister, is at PricewaterhouseCoopers, and she was the driver behind this. Their job application process is, they were finding that they weren't effective, so they revamped it, and in revamping it, they were able to get candidates who were dropping off of the job application within 10 minutes, which I think in today's world, anybody spending 10 minutes on a job application is likely to drop off. And they created a game, and this game basically invites people to pick a job, and then you simulate it, and it's a video game, and it's actually at the same time kind of testing a person's abilities for it. And actually what happened was they discovered that people were spending an average of 90 minutes playing the game. And the other effect of it was that while they're playing this, they're getting introduced to the company culture and what it would be like to work there. And I know I have the stats here, but I don't remember exactly. Grew their candidate pool by 190%. And it reduced, increased interest in working for the company by 78% from the candidate pool that they had.
I'm a
So-
boomer, I'd last 90 seconds on that. I don't have a problem with the application.
So is this the part that says, oh, so you just lead me right into the next slide right there? This is, so are you saying you want opt-in learning and development? Okay.
Give me the hard facts, give me the hammer and I'll work with it.
So this is just some more kind of considerations.
So would for the Gen Xers then in the other slide, the being tech savvy and stuff, is that because the technology is being exposed to them at such a young age? Like my nephew, for example, all of them have tablets. I mean, are only allowed to use it for a certain amount of times, and they play like math games and everything like that, and they think it's so fun because they're holding a tablet.
Yeah.
And then going back to like the education questioning value, because they learn so much by just doing it themselves, do they think they can just like go on and like learn like kind of on their own?
Oh, I think so, and I think rightly so. There's reverse mentoring relationships now where they're partnering millennials and Zers with baby boomers and Xers in some cases to teach them technology because it's just a language they grow up with. So yeah, is that what you were saying? Yeah. Okay. If there's any other stories on that? All right, I think we covered that. So I'm going to go on to, we have enough time to cover this search. So when you're thinking about searching for employees or not starting, but structuring your recruiting program, I always say, first of all, start with what you have. The newsletter that I left for you today actually has an article about effective employee referral programs. And there's, I think, a lot of value for your employees to be able to take advantage of referring people to the company. And, it might sound strange for me to say this, but why would you want to pay an external recruiter money when you can pay your own employee money to bring talent to the company as well? Well, I also want to cover your presence, and then we'll talk about job boards and then going out to actually source for employees. So employees, keeping this number one, of course, saves money, keeps people who work well together, and creates the opportunity for rewards. Do you have employee referral programs right now in place? Yeah, I think it's something that would be really worth thinking about then. There's something other interesting too that I was just thinking about, because I think that it's really important to think about, as I was saying earlier, your whole organization as being your recruiting powerhouse. So like what you're doing with social media, you're doing that just in employing the social media. Everybody's involved, they're all in the videos. You're probably encouraging your employees to share this stuff.
Oh yeah.
And okay, yeah.
LinkedIn, Facebook.
Great. When you're dealing with managers, do you ever deal with hiring managers where you're trying to recruit, or if you're tasked with the job of finding employees for someone else in the company? Like say if you're in human resources hat, or you're recruiting
For hiring managers.
for other hiring managers who look at you and say, it's your job to find people. Okay. So I think that we also, back to the collaborative part, we also need to think about every person in the company sharing the responsibility. So I can give you kind of an example, especially for companies that have maybe recruiting teams, and the managers would wait for a recruiter to give them resumes, and they say yes, no, yes, no. I mean, we live in this world a lot. I'll give you a quick story of one way you can work really effectively with a recruiter. And this is a true story. So I forget the company, but the recruiter who was internal sat down with the CEO, and it was a really key position. So the CEO is talking to the recruiter, they scope it all out, recruiter goes away, knows what they're looking for. This is like on a Thursday afternoon. Friday morning, the recruiter has an email from the CEO and it says, hey, I went on my LinkedIn last night. I have found 5 people that have the profile that I am looking for. I sent them messages. 3 of them responded, and they're interested in talking. Would you connect with them and get the process going? That's what I mean, that kind of collaboration. Everybody has a stake. And if you can get everybody to embrace that and understand and then see the results of, bringing in the people that they want to be working with, I think that it takes hold and it's something that they really internalize. Okay, then your presence. So websites and social media. Just a quick thing on websites. Recently I was reading an article and I read a stat that if a person comes to your website, to your jobs page, the second or third time, they're 400% more likely to apply than the first time. So if you don't have a mechanism, if you have a job board on your company's page where you're advertising positions, and you have no mechanism to grab somebody not entice them, but a mechanism to bring them back. For example, a job search alert. What do you put in a search term? What jobs do you want to be notified about? What's your name and your email address? Location. We'll notify you when we have those jobs. If you don't have that, it's really, it's a very, very simple thing to set up. Some of the plugins for various websites have the technology has plugins you can get for free, actually. And so it's just a tool that costs very, very little, and it can be very impactful to have that working for you when you don't have to do anything once it's set up. The other rule of thumb is 3 clicks, you're out. So on the job application process, if there's a lot of clicking, or if it takes more than, if it takes up to 10 minutes, you're probably going to lose people. And then, I'm sorry, I already mentioned the 3 key people coming back. And then, of course, integrate social media. I think integrate video whenever you can, right on your website as well.
Also will show you if people have reapplied. So people who are applying, who say you're hiring for a customer service person, and you had an HR person you had a job for. It'll show you every job they've applied for in your company.
That's
so
nice.
that you can see what, they've applied 6 times to 6 different positions. This means they're probably just applying to everything.
Mm.
And it will also keep you track, so you can look and see, was there any comments? Did they go through the interview process and they didn't work out, or was there a red flag that you saw? So
And can different people in the company access?
you
and
give
see
access to
Nice.
certain people, so certain people can see everything, and certain people can be part of that one job search. And then you can move people to phone screen and then interview, and you can send them calendar invites
That's great.
and
Was that
email right through Workable.
Was that like an off-the-shelf thing that you could plug and play?
Yeah,
That's great. That's really
you
great.
set up every, yeah. It's great.
That's a good recommendation. Do you both have applicant tracking systems attached to your
No,
website?
that we're thinking of looking at some this year.
Okay. Workable sounds nice.
Mm.
There's another one that I actually started my business with, and I used the Passport version of it, which means it was free. It's called Smart Recruiters, and it was so simple to use. I was able to personally take the code from the Smart Recruiters page and put it in my own website, and it was just up and running. And it's very similar. It's a little bit of a more limited functionality, but it allows you to track candidates, see who's applied for what, like if there's multiple applications from the same person, and then go through stages of phone screen, review, resume, phone screen, interview, offer, hire. And it's searchable. So it is, I'm not saying to try to go on the cheap, because it sounds like what you've got with Workable is really nice.
Yeah, but we just had 5 positions open, and I had people who were applying for all 5 positions. Branch manager, assistant manager, part-time teller, full-time teller, and a facilities person. And I had people that were applying for all 5 positions.
Oh, wow.
And I was trying to keep track of them all manually, and that's why we started talking about we really need to do something about this.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if Smart Recruiters worked very well, if you, just kind of for something basic,
Mhm.
and Workable sounds like a nice enterprise kind
Yeah.
of solution too. So, good, great. Okay, so we've covered, oh, I know what it was. I wanted to just mention, on the flip side, so Kaylin was talking about how Facebook seems to be, from our experience, best with lower skilled positions. And I don't want to forget the ladders, because I've found the ladders to be very effective for high-level positions. The minimum salary to post a job on the ladders has to be $100,000. But if you're looking for, executive level or sale, it's been very good for sales positions as well. So I added that one. And then I'm not going to go through all of these, but these are direct sourcing. This is kind of your direct sourcing toolbox. So places where you can go to, for example, get lists of various types of industry associations, or places where you can actually search for people's contact information. Say you find their profile, or you find their name somehow, but you don't know how to get in touch with them. They're not on LinkedIn, and so there's various sites of info.
The only thing about LinkedIn that you always have to think about is if you're recruiting, unless you're up on the level of you paying extra a month, if you view someone's profile, they're gonna know who you are. And then, especially if you're in the middle of the interview process, you have to be very careful with that.
Do you know, did they take the privacy setting away so you can't be
So
anonymous?
no, they haven't, but standard now is you have to go in and tell it too. So it used
Yeah,
to be,
okay.
it used to be that privacy setting was in place and you
Yeah.
had to undo it, but now you have to go and do it, I believe.
Okay.
And it's interesting you say that, because unless the candidate is paying for the premium LinkedIn, they don't know unless your company allows it to be seen,
Exactly.
which is what I found. Because I was like, oh, 23 people looked at my LinkedIn profile, and then I'd go and I'd only see 3 companies, because the other 3 companies chose to be private managed, and I also didn't pay for the premium. So
Okay.
you're very limited, but yeah, LinkedIn did take that feature and made it default, so you have to go in and say, I want to be private.
Okay, okay. So there's that, yeah.
You just gotta be careful, because if you look at one candidate's LinkedIn page, you have to look at every candidate you interview.
Oh,
So
oh,
that it's a whole
I see what you're saying.
combination
Mhm.
thing.
Yeah, yeah, okay. Maybe that's what you do.
Yeah.
Make it a practice, right?
Look at everybody.
Yeah. Okay. And actually, I think we're leaving, okay, we still have some time for questions. Thank you so much for all of your engagement and asking questions and sharing your anecdotes. I really appreciate that. So any other questions though, as we wrap up?
I just wanted to ask, you were mentioning about that they're taking the youngest group,
Z.
Gen Zers, and pairing them with the boomers and beyond for technology purposes. Is that something that's being pushed out? Like, is that someone actively doing that, or is that just something that's anecdotally happening? I love it. It happened in my house. My
Really?
my mom moved in. She was, she was 70 years old, and we got her on Facebook.
Okay.
And they were teaching her how to use, my daughters were teaching her how to use her tablet that we bought her. And watching that process was fascinating, absolutely fascinating. So I'm just curious, is that something that's like actively happening, or is it just anecdotally happening?
Actively happening. And some organizations that have mentoring programs in place, they've actually expanded to reciprocal mentoring programs where more experienced workers, life experienced workers, can mentor less experienced workers. And then on the other hand, the less experienced workers can be teaching the more experienced workers the technology. So there's the reciprocal mentoring program, and then or relationships that they're building into the programs. And then there's also the reverse, where it's just a one-way from the younger person mentoring on the technology side for more experienced people.
It's very important because you don't want to lose that knowledge that the baby boomers have.
Yeah.
Because what happens is eventually they'll retire.
Yeah.
And if you've got staff in your company who could learn those skills, in retiring, you've got all that knowledge that nobody in the company knows.
Yeah, absolutely.
Important.
Yeah.
And I think, just the mindset that we all have value to contribute and we all have things we need. So just bringing us together, it's just, it's logical. Great. So then I'm going to leave you, if there's no other questions, I just want to leave you with one of my favorite quotes in the work environment or, anything you're looking to achieve. If you want to build a ship, don't drum up the people to gather the word, divide the work and give orders. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Mindset Entrepreneur Video Podcast. I am your host, Mark Altman, and I'm here with my guest today, Melissa Glenny, founder of Franklin Professional Associates. Melissa, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Good to have you here today. And Melissa is a master of recruiting and staffing. She's taken on a very challenging and competitive industry and has a tremendous amount of experience. And Melissa, I guess I'd like to start out with you today and kind of understand. I know you have a great passion for music, and kind of how your passion for music kind of maybe perhaps spun off into staffing and recruiting.
It did. I was in college studying production engineering and noticed that there were a fair amount of graduates from Berkeley where I was attending that were going on to be baristas. So I went to a temp agency and got a job, and the rest is history.
So happily ever after.
The bug bit and I never got out.
So Melissa, one of the things about staffing and recruiting, I've always felt in my career and talking to many other leaders and executives is it's so hard to understand the right criteria when choosing a company and really understanding that it's so critical, hiring and employee retention and things like that. So for our listeners out there that are watching, how do you do it? How do you know if A, the company your current company is the right company, and B, if you're considering taking the plunge to using a company like yours, how do I know what the right fit is?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's so many different companies to choose from, and there are certainly those that fit well and wouldn't fit well. My suggestion is I always ask a customer, tell me about your last quarterly business review with your vendor. And most of the time they say, what are you talking about?
I was just thinking that. I was thinking, thank God you haven't asked me that yet, but okay, good.
And so, that's what you start with. And so if you're not getting a quarterly business review, then it's something to at least approach your partners with and say, can we have a review? Hopefully they, have come up with something like, oh yeah, it's time, we need to do that. And they have a process for it. I've had the pleasure of learning from a company that did it very, very well. And you involve all the key stakeholders throughout the company to really get a comprehensive view of what it is that they need, what are the key features that the program needs, what are the challenges, where are the gaps, and then it's a matter of what is your partner or what are your partners doing to fill those gaps, and give that some time, and then figure out if it's working, and then what you need to go out and shop for if it doesn't work.
So are there, from a KPIs or metrics or something, are there a couple that you would highlight that if they are doing those reviews, it should include a few of those specifically that you think are important?
Well, based on what I hear from customers, I would say that the key top considerations tend to be time to fill and the quality. I probably would reverse that to quality and time to fill. Those two key factors are through and through really important to people.
So I know people value you and your company so much for your industry expertise and knowledge, local marketing knowledge, and so on and so forth. One of the things I've always wondered, Melissa, that I've been wanting to ask you is, it's one thing to understand quality from hires and fires. It's another thing to understand the people that stay, how good they are relative. So how do you assess that?
Yeah. One of the questions that I love to ask when I'm sitting down and assessing, I call it an intake basically with a manager. I'll say, what is this person 6 months from now or 3 months from now, maybe? It depends on the role. What is it that they will have done or what problem will they have solved that will constitute this being a successful placement? Maybe that's shooting out to a 12 months. And the other question that I ask is, what would constitute failure? Things have changed in tenure, as you might have noticed. 2 years with a company is pretty good for a lot of people these days. 10 years ago, 2 years, 2 years, 2 years was a flag. So I rely on managers to tell me, what does success look like?
So I know and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think one of the fears around staffing and recruiting is the cost of making the wrong decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And not just that, the cost of making the wrong decisions, but the ups and downs of the marketplace itself, and the people in it. So how can you assuage those fears of they could be irrational sometimes, but how are you able to assuage those fears?
Yeah, one thing I always say is you can't solve a retention problem with a recruiting solution. So I really try to get at, where the fears are coming from and what are the past stories that those fears are being born from. So in some cases, it's a matter of just getting a reality check and showing managers, the situation that they're dealing with and educating them really, so that they understand, well, we're going to have to tweak a couple of things within our organization if we want things to work the way that we're expecting them to work. And then once we have that foundation, then we can go from there in defining the profile of the person and what we need to assess for. And so, if we start out on a shaky foundation, which is what I look to determine when I'm assessing the situation of the company, then you don't have you're not set up for very good success. So I really try to make sure that foundation is shored up before we set forth.
So Melissa, one of the things before we have guests on the show, I really try to vet out the reputation of our guests to make sure they're high quality entrepreneurs. And I know you and your company have such an amazing reputation. What is it that you do from a trust perspective? Because that's so big in entrepreneurship. How are you able to establish the trust that people have the confidence that you can execute for them?
Yeah, it's I think first it's just being trustworthy. It's just kind of, I give my trust. I think that's one of the things that really establishes it right out of the gate. And I feel so fortunate because that's something that's just so rich in the relationships that we have and the companies that we work with. They know that they can call up and say, hey, we don't have a huge budget, but we're trying to make something happen. Can you help us? And they know that I'll be there to try to figure out how to, solution find. And so I think that when they see that you just genuinely care about their well-being, it doesn't relate to anything I particularly say. It's more of our actions.
Well, so that's important. And that brings us to core values. Integrity is a core value and walking the walk and talking the talk.
Mm-hmm.
So when you were younger, did you have influences in your life that really helped you and set you on a good path? And if you did, how have you taken the things that you were taught to serve your customers in the best way?
Yeah. My childhood, like most people's childhood, I think, was sometimes tumultuous and chaotic, and so I really struggled. And my mother was a real beacon of light for me through the storm, and she was very supportive. So I have the experience of feeling stuck and not knowing which way to turn and frustrated. And today, I meet so many people in my work that are in that exact situation, or in that state, I should say. And that's, I think, what really drives me is just that compulsion to say, hey, it doesn't have to stay this way. It's just a temporary state. There's solutions, and shine some light.
Well, and I think, Melissa, to me, I think when you're in the business of helping people, which you are, I really believe this, Amar, you can only help people if you've experienced the vulnerability yourself and you know what it's like to be in the shoes of needing help and also receiving the help and being able to receive that help.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that you experienced that, because as you taught me, the recruiting and staffing are two very different sides of the business. And so you're dealing with many companies, but you're also dealing with many individuals.
Yeah.
And so balancing needs and balancing being a support system, and it's not just, hey, how much money can I get you and what's the great job? It's the relationship along the way and understanding people's fears.
Absolutely, absolutely. A lot of motives are fundamentally related to fears. So if we can get there, we can really get people what they're looking for.
Well, and I think you hit the nail on the head. I think motives and motivators are so critical to really setting people on the right path, understanding what drives them and motivates them. So, uh, I know you're located in Leominster, and how big of a factor does geography play in the clients you serve?
Well, much less than it did at one point in time. I started 17 years ago, and we had people walking in for interviews, and we were faxing resumes. But I found when I spent 7-8 years in Westboro and Marlboro running teams that we were going to Leominster to recruit because
Wow.
yeah, there's a significant outflow of professionals who live in that area, and they're traveling to the boroughs, or they're going into Boston, or they're going up to Nashua. So it just made sense if we could be where all the jobs are, which is in the boroughs in Boston and Boston North, or we can go be where the people are. They come in and meet us after.
Seems like kind of a no-brainer when you put it like that. I like that.
And then they go off to work after they meet with us. So it happened to be a really good spot, and I love that I also live there.
Wow. And so what about companies? If they are deciding, let's say they had 2 or 3 companies they were looking for to do their staffing and or recruiting for them, what should they be asking you? What are the questions they should be asking you to vet you out, or any other company out for that matter? What advice would you give these companies to say, if you ask these questions, you'll be in a much better path to select the right company?
If I were in their shoes, I would ask to talk to customers, and no one does that, but that tends to be the way that I choose partners. I always want to talk to another customer or two. But as far as just basic questions go, I would ask things about, the experience of the team, the process that they follow, and whatever their process may be, it may be relevant to the customer or not, but at least to know that there is a process and to understand what it is, so that if they meet someone and the agency had only phone screened, the last thing you want is for there to be a disconnect between the expectations and the customer saying, you didn't even meet this person. So I would ask those questions. I would also ask questions about metrics. How long would it take to fill this kind of a position? Or, what can we expect in terms of turnover? What do you see? And it just gets the dialogue going, which I think is valuable for both parties.
So, I know you've had 17 years of experience. One question I would wonder is, when you first started in the industry, over the 12 years you worked previously before you started the company, what are some lessons you've learned, that maybe approaches or strategies you took back at your old company that you learned from and you've approached very differently now?
Oh yeah, I was so fortunate to work for 3 awesome companies before I ventured out. And what I did is I really tried to take the best practices and amplify them, and things that were frustrating to me that made me feel like it was difficult to really serve the customer. We had, as you need, pillars and rules, and there was red tape, and sometimes the customer needed us to tweak something, and we just couldn't do it. So I struggled with that so much, and that was a big motivator for me to venture out on my own, so I could say, I want to be able to really be creative and craft something that's maybe totally different and out of the box, and not be in trouble for it.
Well, and honestly, Melissa, that to me is the best part of being an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
It's because you can be creative, craft that solution that in your heart, based on the experience and your ability to succeed.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Let's do some rapid fires to finish up today. Most important characteristic in managing people?
I want to say trust, but I think that I'm going to have to say it's communication, because trust, if you can't communicate.
Well said. Well said. Right, because to know if you can trust or earn the trust, you have to be able to communicate to find that out.
Yeah.
Yeah, well said. How about taking care of customers? What's the most important characteristic there?
I think it's genuinely caring to take care of them. And that means also knowing when you can't take care of them, that you can get them in the right hands. Our job is sometimes very difficult.
Yep.
It's tedious. Our inventory can walk right off the shelf. It's frustrating sometimes. So if you don't really care and have something intrinsically driving you to keep going and figure it out for your customer, it's easy to say, well, maybe I should focus on something else.
Well, and that's critical what you just said. It's the intrinsic motivator.
Yeah.
That's the key. And you know, I got a piece of advice in the various companies I've started and worked with over the years. I got a piece of advice, and it was that the customers sign your paychecks, not your boss
Yeah.
or the owners or whatever. And it's really the truth.
It is.
Okay, and last question is, what's the worst thing, you know, your experience as an entrepreneur, looking back at the different challenges you faced over the years in your career, what's the worst thing someone could do now that you look back and see some of the mistakes that you've learned from and some of the successes that you've learned from? What would you tell aspiring entrepreneurs not to do?
It sounds so simple, but I have to say this probably is the advice that I would give anybody in just about any situation. Just never lie. It's just, it's so destructive and it's so unnecessary. So that would be my number one, never do.
Awesome. Melissa, thank you so much for joining us today. We're thrilled to have you on the show. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
So Melissa Glenny, founder of Franklin Professional Associates, excelling at staffing and recruiting. I'm your host, Mark Altman, and thank you for joining us for the Mindset Entrepreneur video podcast.